Alright, welcome to the second part of our digestive systems for week 1 of the Animal Science 230 Feeds and Nutrition class. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off, in which we had initially introduced the different classifications using both diet and anatomy to break down how we can classify the digestive systems. Ruminants versus non-ruminants, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores. So what we're going to do right now in this series, in this video, is we're going to pick up with that and actually walk through the digestive systems of some of the different animals. Before we get into the actual images of the systems, there's a few things we need to understand in terms of how the digestive system relates to diet. The first thing is understanding that avian species, chickens, turkeys, the poultry type species, they cannot handle large amounts of fiber. So we don't normally feed them high forage based diets. They usually are on a grain-based diet of some kind. Omnivorous species, such as the pig, can handle more fiber than the birds, but less than the herbivores. They're kind of the in-between, which makes sense because they can eat a little bit of both types of plants and animal material. Non-ruminant herbivores can do well on a lower quality plant material than the omnivorous species. So like a non-ruminant herbivore would be a horse. They can handle lower quality plant material than a pig can. However, the best species adapted to a high fiber plant material diet is the ruminants. We can feed them higher concentrate diets, meaning higher grain, but there is a risk for digestive upsets, so it takes balancing those very carefully to make sure you maintain animal health and well-being. So these animals can all handle different amounts of fibers. Poultry handle the least amount of fiber, ruminants can handle the most. Herbivores, whether they're ruminant or non-ruminant, use large amounts of fiber. So the herbivores are designed for forage-based diets. And there's two methods of how they use it depending on the species. In the ruminants, think about cows or sheep, they use what we call pre-gastric fermentation, with pre meaning before. Okay? So that means that before the true stomach, the microbes are present to break down that feed. In contrast, in the horses and rabbits, they use what's called post-gastric, meaning after. So after the true stomach is where the microbes are present. And you'll see this in our pictures. But it's important to understand the difference between pre- and post-gastric fermentation, or where those microbes are located. So these are in species that handle high amounts of microbial digestion. If we're talking about simple stomached animals, the non-ruminant species, such as pigs, poultry, dogs, cats, etc., they do require highly digestible diets with very high nutrient sources. So they don't handle fiber and some other things as well as the herbivores do. Okay, we're going to start with the pig as our base animal as we start talking about the digestive system. And when we talk about the digestive system, it's important to understand that it's essentially a tube structure, okay, that connects the mouth and the rectum or the anus, and it's a tube in which food passes and ultimately can be digested. So it starts with the mouth. We have the esophagus that we can follow along to the stomach right here, and the stomach is essentially a holding vat. It does have a low pH, it's acidic, it is one of those things that really that starts the chemical breakdown of a lot of nutrients, but it's not the primary site of digestion. The next part that the animal that comes up is the small intestine, this area right in here. And the first part of the small intestine is actually called the duodenum. There's 3 parts. That duodenum is the primary site for digestion in a pig. If I can write digestion on my iPad. Sorry, that's digestion. And so it is critical that understanding that this is where enzymatic digestion is happening in that duodenum. So it passes through the rest of the small intestine, ultimately going into the cecum and the colon, or the part of the large intestine, where there are some microbial species, some microbes are there, that will break down the food. It's an omnivore, so it has some microbes can handle both. However, it is not like the herbivores that truly can handle higher levels. Now, one thing we do want to look at is the relative proportion of the different anatomical parts in the pig. The size of the stomach compared to the rest of the GI tract. The size of the small intestine, large intestine. Yes, it's a picture, but it can give us a rough idea that if you look at the pig GI tract, especially compared to some other species, they're fairly balanced. Let's look at the next non-ruminant, specifically the herbivore, and our example is going to be the horse. So again, the GI tract is a tube that connects the mouth to the anus, and feed passes through here and goes through digestion. Now, we have a similar structure to the pig in that we have the esophagus as that first part, and then we have the stomach, and this is where acid is present and all of those things. But when you look at the stomach as a proportion of the rest of the GI tract of the horse, it is tiny. So horses are designed as grazers. They can handle small meals lots of times a day. That's how they have evolved. And so it's because this stomach is not a large capacity stomach. When you continue on from the stomach and you move into this mess of stuff that's called the small intestine right here, that's where a lot of the enzymatic digestion. Again, it has the three parts like the pig, where the first part, the duodenum, is the primary site of digestion. But also a lot of absorption happens in there as well. From the small intestine, then we move into what we call the hindgut of the horse, which is all of this other stuff, the colon and the cecum. And there's two types of colons. There's an ascending or descending, sometimes a large and small. But if you notice in this herbivore-based diet, their large intestine, the colon and the cecum. We also call this the hindgut as well. And that includes all three of them, just so you know. Lots of little arrows on here. I feel like John Madden. And so when we talk about that large intestine, that is where the microbial population is. That is where fiber is broken down, and it is post-gastric because it is after the stomach. Okay, so the next stop for that feed as it moves through the horse is actually out on the ground in horse apples. Poop, sorry. And so we need to understand how that works. So if you look relative to, compared to the pig, you will notice that the large intestine is much bigger, much more complex as a part of the digestive system than in the non-ruminant omnivore or our pig. Next we have the non-ruminant carnivore, and these have dogs and cats. The dogs are a little bit more complex, but not much, but it is a very simple digestive system. We have the esophagus, we have a stomach, we have a small intestine, and we have their large intestine right here. It is very simple, very muscular. It is not a complex digestive system because the carnivores are used to enzymatic digestion. Whoops, let me undo that because I did not spell that right. Enzymatic digestion. And so they're used to just having highly digestible diets such as animal protein. Meat is easily digested, and so they don't need a lot of complexity. They do not eat a lot of fiber, so therefore the large intestine is not developed at all. So very simplistic for the carnivore. And now the ruminant, on the other hand, is a much more complex system because now we're into what we call the ruminants, which have the complex stomach. And so when we take a look at the digestive system of the ruminant, we've got the mouth, and then this whole complex right here is considered the stomach. There are 4 compartments. Okay, I'm just going to abbreviate compartments. They are the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. The abomasum is considered the true stomach, and so that is this one right here. Colored in kind of green there. That's considered the true stomach. And so when we talk about pre-gastric fermentation. That is wise because the microbial population lives in the rumen. And that is where the cow is able to handle high fiber diets. It's pre-gastric fermentation. There are some other benefits that we'll break into. And so that's why we talk about lots of bacteria in there. From there, also in cattle, just like in other species, from the stomach we move into the small intestine, which is right here, and the large intestine, which includes the colon and the cecum. And so there are microbes that live in here as well, however not nearly the numbers as we find in the rumen. So the cattle actually have both pre and post gastric fermentation available to them. The avian species, we'll take a look at a chicken, is actually a little bit different than the other species we've talked about. And remember, they do not handle fiber hardly at all, and especially in modern poultry. And so when we take a look, chickens have a beak. They do not have teeth, so they cannot grind or chew their food at all. So we start off in their beak area, and it goes down the esophagus. But then we have an enlargement, which is essentially a holding vat for food, that's called the crop. Then food will continue down through here and go into the stomach structure, which is the proventriculus and the gizzard. The gizzard is also called a ventriculus. So we have the proventriculus and the ventriculus right there. Make that a better T. And this is where the proventriculus acts like a true stomach with acid and those types of things. And the ventriculus, or the gizzard, is a mechanical grinding organ that will actually help grind particles down in size. And so both of those work together to reduce particle size. Then we move into the small intestine, and there is a little bit of a large intestine, and the birds have actually 2 ceca. But in the modern species, so these are the same as a single cecum, but in the modern domestic species, these are essentially non-functional. FXN means function. And so there's not any microbial digestion goes on or anything like that. And so the bird is a little bit different compared to our other species. So because they don't have teeth, they can't grind stuff up really easily. If you notice, a lot of bird feed is already ground, pelleted, or something that allows it to help break down food. So essentially, the take-home message from the second part is we need to understand the digestive systems to be able to understand what we're feeding those animals. And making sure we match the right food types to the right digestive system is going to be what really can affect our animals' health, well-being, performance, and affect our feeding decisions and how we're going to feed these animals. So that wraps up the digestive systems. Don't forget to read in the textbook about them as well. And we will finish up this week's material with a section on nutrients.